Hi everyone, this is Karyne Norton, host and sometimes narrator of this brand new podcast, Finding Fantasy Reads, where I find amazing fantasy short stories to share with you so you can then find your next favorite author. This episode is just a quick overview of what you can expect to hear each time you listen to Finding Fantasy Reads. I wanted to start this podcast because I wanted someone to weed through the hundreds of fantasy authors and handpick the good ones for me. And then because I'm super lazy, I also wanted someone to spoon feed me short stories so I could sample the author's style for myself before reading their full-length novels. When I realized no one was going to do that for me, I decided to turn around and do that for everyone else. So if you're a fantasy reader who's always on the lookout for new books, worlds, and series to consume, this podcast is here to make that search a little bit easier. Every week, you'll get to hear a new fantasy short story. I'll also tell you a little bit about the author, but mostly I'll just dive right into reading the story because that's what you came for. At the end, I'll be sure to share how you can find more of their stories if you like what you heard. I hope to keep the episodes between 30 and 60 minutes, but fantasy authors can be long-winded, so don't hold me to that. In fact, the very first episode will go a little over an hour, but I promise it will be worth it. And speaking of the first episode, keep an eye out for it on June 6th, which is when the podcast will officially launch, with 3 full episodes with stories from 3 of my very favorite authors. I will be limiting the stories to clean fantasy because I want to keep the non-explicit rating for the podcast and because I have 4 kids, and at least 2 of them are going to want to listen to this. Because clean can be defined a number of ways, I'll try to give you a simple comparison for how I'm defining it for the podcast. Language will stay in the G range, romance or spice might creep up to the PG range, and violence might get up to PG-13. My goal is to explore all sorts of subgenres within the larger fantasy genre so we can all experiment together and hopefully find some stories we wouldn't have normally read otherwise. For now, I'll be narrating all the stories told from a female perspective, and you can expect to hear my brother, Paeter Frandsen, host of the Christian Geek Central podcast, narrating the stories told from a male perspective. As I said before, I'm Karyne Norton. I'm a reader like you, but I'm also an author of epic fantasy. My first book won't be released until later this year, but I promise at some point I'll be sharing one of my own short stories on the podcast. If you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, the best thing you can do is to subscribe to the podcast. Depending on what phone you have, you'll want to open the podcasting app of your choice and search for Finding Fantasy Reads. Then click on follow or subscribe or whatever button looks like the one that might get you the notifications you're looking for. You can also head to findingfantasyreads.com and click on the links there or sign up for email updates if that's more your thing. You'll also find information there about our monthly giveaways, which is something I'm super excited about. It will include books and prizes donated by that month's featured authors, and I've made it as easy as possible for you to enter. If you have any questions, they're probably answered on findingfantasyreads.com, but there's also a contact form there so you can reach out to me. Thanks so much for checking out Finding Fantasy Reads. I expect that we're both about to discover a ton of amazing new stories and authors.